All right. Well, I'm Michelle Wilkins. I'm the children's minister at First Methodist in Hot Springs, and we want to welcome Reverend Dawn Spragg. She has an MS LPC, received her bachelor's in psychology from John Brown University, attended Phillips Theological Seminary, and received her master's in counseling from John Brown University. She is an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church and serves as the pastor of contemporary worship at Central United Methodist Church in Rogers. Reverend Spragg is going to be teaching this session too on From Pandemic and Beyond, Caring for Families and Children at the request of the CCCM team. And so we'll learn about how you know when a family's pain needs our listening ear, or a referral to trained in family counseling. And she's going to have an Arkansas resource list for family therapy that we'll get. Reverend Spragg, before we start, I have a question. Would you like people to raise their hand on the screen or put their question in the chat box?
I think put their questions in the chat box, just because I can't see everybody. We're across
right. Yeah, there's too many.
So, yeah, so that would be helpful. And my hope is that I'm going to I've kind of three objectives today, and so I do have a PowerPoint. So I'm going to pause in between each one of those for questions. So if you don't mind just kind of keeping up with those, and I'll be happy to answer a few. I'm going to keep an eye on the time. And if I don't get to answer all the questions from each of those, I'll do some follow-up, either making sure that you have my email or whatever way works best to make sure that I can get people's questions answered at the end or in between. And then at the end, if we have time, we can go back to some of those. So that'd be preferable.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to you, Reverend Spragg. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. And so very, very too formal. Reverend Spragg doesn't really jive with me, so you can call me Dawn if you want to address me at all. Please feel free to do that. I do have three things I would really like to talk about today. I primarily work with teenagers. I'll kind of share that a little bit with you all, but I'm so excited to be talking about kids and just kind of what's going on with them. And what I'd really like to do is start with a prayer for all of you who are doing life-giving work right now in the midst of some very challenging times. I know that the impact that you have on kids, I know what that is, and I'm so incredibly grateful for each of you and all the work you do. So I'd really like to start with prayer. Most faithful and holy Lord God, I do give thanks to you. Thanks to you for your son, Jesus, the life-saving work that he offers to each of us. But also, God, I just thank you for these people gathered who love your children, who want so much for them to love you and know that they are loved by you. I ask for your blessing to be on each and every one of them in their work and in their lives. And I ask this in Christ's powerful name. Amen. Okay, so the three things we're really going to talk about are brain development and kind of the impact of trauma. There's lots of new research and new ways of understanding that. So I know that there are probably some of you who are trained in child development and in those areas, but I also know that a lot of people who work with our children don't have that necessarily as a formal background. So I'll do my best not to be too repetitive for people who may already know this. Plus, we don't have enough time to really delve into too incredibly deep. Also going to talk a little bit about what to look for, how to know that somebody might need some help. And then we'll finish up a little bit with making referrals and what that looks like. I don't have an exhaustive list of therapists, but we'll talk about that when we kind of get to the bottom. So let me pull up my PowerPoint, share my screen. Hopefully I can do this well. Let's do that. How's that look?
Good.
Does that look good? Okay, there's great. Okay. So I want to start with this passage that I know you all are incredibly familiar with, Psalm 139. But this passage reminds me so much. This is kind of this is not a real theology, but the theology of development. Okay, when we look at children and we think about them growing up, my theology of development is wow. Wonderfully omnipotent work. This work that God does in us as humans is just unbelievable. And the fact that he knit us together, like created human beings to grow and become, to me, is just a powerful reminder of God's amazing ability to work and to create. And as we grow, it just keeps reminding us of how incredible we are as a creation. It's just amazing. So I love this passage. I know that you're all very familiar with it, but you're also familiar with this passage out of Matthew, where parents brought their children to Jesus so he could lay his hands on them and pray over them. But they were the disciples of all people. Scolded them and had them stay back. And Jesus is just, we love this passage. Jesus says, no, let those children come to me. Do not stop them. Do not hinder them. Different passages say different words. For the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are like children. So even Jesus knew that growth was going to happen, for not just for children, for all of us, and how incredibly important it is that our children be allowed to step into that relationship with Jesus and grow and grow in knowledge and faith. And so, just a little bit about our brains and how they work. You probably, many of you are probably really familiar with this, but we know that the brain grows from the back to the front. And so in development, infants start very much in a place where they're sensory processing. Everything is about their physical selves, and they experience the world in that way. Takes a little while for language development to come on and to be able to connect those two things. So that's where they start. They grow, and developmentally, we know that there's a latency period where there's just lots of things happening in their brain, but it's just not overwhelmed with specific things. As far as learning goes, they're still taking things in and connecting the physical and the concrete with language and how to understand that. By the time they're teenagers, they're kind of moving to the middle of the brain, and all of those things in the amygdala, the emotion, just emotion processing and impulse control, all of those kind of things, all happening when they get to be around 12 to 13 years old. We know now that research-wise, we know that the brain is developing as quickly in adolescence as it was when they were toddlers. So we used to think that kind of you were done by 5, but that's not really, the research doesn't show that. So we know there's lots and lots of brain development going on in adolescence. And then hopefully we get all the way to the prefrontal cortex when we are out of adolescence and becoming adults, and we can make really rational decisions. We can connect and integrate both the right and left hemisphere of the brain. We can process emotion. We can do all the things. So that's kind of the where we are. The children that you are working with are primarily in a latency period, unless you're working with very young children. or maybe you're working some with kids who are on the brink of adolescence or heavy in it. So that's where I spend a lot of my time. So I do know a good bit about it, but if you have questions about the children development, I can probably touch on that as well. So this is a more simple way. We call this a cognitive behavioral pattern. It's pretty simple. I teach it to teens and I teach it to families with kids. It's really this process of understanding that things happen all the time. Things are happening around us. And we process primarily in two ways. We process through cognitive processing, so we think about things. And some people are primarily cognitive processors. They're very left brain.
Oh yeah, it is right down there.
They're very left
Let's
brain.
mute, please.
Yeah.
Sarah, I need you to mute, please.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. So some people are primarily cognitive processors. They tend to be more logical in how they process. And then we have emotion. We're knit together with emotion. This is part of God's design and plan. And so some people are primarily right-brained, and they will process often through emotion first. So sometimes that think and feel can be exchanged over which one comes first. And you may very well know, if you've ever taken a personality profile, you probably know which one of those you process primarily through. But it's really important to know that every kid does both. They process cognitively and through emotion, and some are primarily one or the other. So, and in a family, I have 3 children. My kids are flipped around. So some of them primarily one way and some the other. And then we are people of action. So we do things. That's part of who we are. The challenge is that behavior is the only thing we can see. It's the only thing that's in front of us. So we see behavior and we think we know where it's coming from, but we might be mistaken about that. So the one thing that's really important to know is that the wheel goes this direction. Whatever happens, we process through emotion and cognitive processes before we do anything. So when we only focus on behavior and changing behavior, we miss the pattern that's keeping that behavior in place. So that's kind of a really important thing, because you can change a behavior and sometimes it'll change how you feel or what you think, but it won't last, because God's design is for us to process these things inside and the process through the processes that we do. So, and the other thing that's real important to remember is that everybody has their own wheel. So the children in front of you, the parents in front of you, the volunteers you're working with, all of them are processing things that are happening in very different ways through their own patterns. So that becomes quite challenging, I'm sure, when you're working with large groups of people. So let's talk a minute about trauma and just what it is. We talk about, it's kind of a topic at hand right now, because we are in the middle of what we are calling a collective trauma with the pandemic, but also there are so many traumatic things happening around us, from social injustice and prejudice and political divide and all kinds of other things, that there's quite a bit of collective trauma happening around us. So trauma is really just anything that's intense and overwhelming, those experiences, and they're perceived, that the things that are happening are perceived, which reminds us that children are perceiving things completely different because of where they are in their brain development than an adult who is fully developed. And so that becomes really important. But there's a threat of harm that's being perceived. Harm to the physical self, the emotional well-being, or the sense of control. So as a child, you have very limited control except on yourself, on what's going on in you and what you're doing in response to that. So, that's another really important thing to remember, is that kids and teenagers too have very limited amounts of control. The experiences could be a one-time thing, or they can happen over a period of time. So many of you are probably pretty aware of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. There is quite an exhaustive list of things that we know really impact brain development, specifically for kids. And those things involve abuse and poverty, grief, bullying, a parent or guardian with substance use that has a substance abuse issue or mental health issues, a parent in prison, but also what we're experiencing now is these collective traumas that are happening. So that I've already mentioned some of them, but a natural disaster is something that can really impact a child and their development. But what happens in all of these cases is that there is a short circuit in development, because safety is involved somewhere in their perceived, in their perception of what's happened. There's a safety issue, and so it's really important for them to protect, and then they can't process in normal ways. So we know that that those side roads kind of keep kids in situations where they aren't able to think clear and make healthy decisions, and their brain isn't developing in the way we really need it to develop. So, so why does it matter? Why does trauma matter so very much? Let's see. I love this this quote from Stephen Porges, that trauma compromises our ability to engage with others by replacing patterns of connection with patterns of protection. So that's really important. It's hard for an adult to really go back to that space where remembering what it's like to be a child in certain situations. But it is really important for us to recognize, and especially now the trauma research that we have teaches us that trauma of any kind really damages development. So we have no idea what we'll see in 10 years from now with all that we have going on, but in the mental health field, we're certainly anticipating some different challenges for kids as they make their way into adulthood. But the other thing about this is that it reminds me of that passage we talked about in Matthew, where Jesus says, let the children come to me, like let them understand and grow in their faith. And we know that trauma keeps them away from that. It hinders them from being able to feel safe and connected. And in those cases, it makes it difficult for them to fully understand the connection that they have with God and God with them. And so that relationship becomes difficult to navigate for kids. They wonder, adults do too, why does God let this happen? Can he be trusted? And so that becomes the challenge as you help kids develop their faith. So I'm gonna, let's see, stop my share for a moment and see if I can stop my share. Let me see here.
It should be at the top of your screen where it says stop share.
Yeah, it does, but I can't get it to, for some reason I can't get it to shut off. Okay, well, I can't see my, let's see. No, not new share. Stop share. There it goes. I think. Did it stop?
Yep.
Okay. Well, something else is on here though. Ah. Uh-oh.
We see
Okay.
you.
You do?
Yep.
Okay.
And
Well, I
then
don't.
we're all down the side. So just talk away, Sister Pie.
Oh no, you're not down the side for me. Hold on.
Click
Yeah.
up there to the right to view.
I got that. Hold on. Let me pull my Zoom back up. I gotcha. Whew, little moment of scare. Okay, so I'd like to see if you have any questions as we take a break right here. And you can throw those up in the chat. Or
Or you
Michelle,
can-
you can.
Yeah, I can unmute them or they can unmute themselves.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine if you want to do that. I'm going to take about, let's see, about 5 or 10 minutes at the most to answer questions right now.
Leanne, did you have a question? Let me see.
I do. Thank you. I didn't know how to put it in the chat. So you know your little circle thing? I love that. And then if I could make it 3-dimensional, I turn it on its side. Does it get deep? Is it a spiral, like it spirals, like, or is it just a constant circle? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. It really is. I mean, I've never done it in 3D or spiral, but what
I don't know how to do it either.
I know what I typically do will really, when I'm working, when people can interact with me really easily, is really to talk about what happens. And I'll give you an example, like bullying. So if a child is bullied, what might they think? So I'll get all kinds of words. They think that they're not important, that they're insignificant, that there's something wrong with them. And so we'll just kind of create, a whole list. And then what feelings go along with that as well. Feeling, inadequate, unworthy, not valuable. So then what do they do? What's the response out of that when kids don't feel that way? And it's really a good way to understand that if a kid is being bullied and they think all of those things about themselves and they feel all of those things, you might have one of two different behaviors. One, they might shut down completely. They might be withdrawn. There might be self-harm. They might use really negative language about themselves. Or the other, which would be in an effort to protect, they will bully other people because that makes them feel significant and like powerful and important. And remember the trauma that we talked about, people feel if they don't feel like they have control, they'll either shut down or they'll take control. And so that's how we see, you can see two completely different behaviors from the exact same things on the wheel. And so you have to be able to change the thought and feeling patterns to be able to change any behavior. Does that make sense? And is that helpful?
Yeah, and so then when it goes from that action back to the event, you're hoping that the next time, because you've done that process, that they can interpret a similar event differently, or it's like I say, yes, that is very helpful. And it's also helpful to me that, like, if you bring your own garbage, you're the teacher, and they have their cycle, I can see where those two are like fighting tornadoes sometimes. It really clarifies why we all get crazy so fast.
That's exactly right.
Colleen had a question about the chart and asking, is this something that you can show to kids? Did you see that in the chat? Or is it something that you just work through with the adults, for the adults to?
Oh, no, I do this with everybody. Kids, teens, adults. Yep. Everybody has a wheel. It's really important for people to become aware of like how they process and how that impacts what they do and what they maybe do next time. I think Amy has her hand up.
Okay, let me see if Amy, can you unmute yourself, or let me?
I think she did.
Yeah, she did. Oh,
where'd she go?
She went away.
No.
I don't know.
Okay.
To somebody else.
I'll take one more and then we'll move on.
I just want to say that I think this is really good to bring this to everybody's forefront, because so often I know with my kids, they think they should be, nothing bad should happen, and that they should be able to adapt perfectly. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you still
No.
have so much to learn. Like, this is just the beginning process. So this is good to reframe this, that you are all still learning.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back to sharing my screen. Hopefully I won't mess up this time, and talk a little bit more about these things. So, okay, y'all can see that, right? Okay, so Dr. Dawn Hubner, who she's a clinical psychologist, a parent coach, and she's got lots and lots of books that she's written. They're not faith-based, but they're really around anxiety, helping kids with anxiety. Let me get this on here. And she uses this great metaphor. I love this metaphor. It's about a smoke detector. So just to kind of talk a little bit about where kids are, especially now in the midst of this pandemic, we are seeing, well, I spent a long time talking about what we're seeing, but a lot of kids just really heightened anxiety and fear, and not just the pandemic, but a lot of things that are going on right now. And so she uses this metaphor of a smoke detector. It's so important to have one in your home. Like, it keeps you safe. We don't want to get rid of them. We need to have them. But here's the thing: if the smoke alarm goes off in the middle of the night, the two extreme choices would be this: you jump out of bed, you get everybody out of bed, you run out of your house, and call 911, house is on fire. That's one. The other extreme is like, meh, it's probably nothing, and you just stay in bed and do nothing. So either one of those is really probably not the response that you, as a responsible, rational adult, would do. I'm guessing. I don't know. But what you would do is probably get up and look around and see what's happening, and smell for smoke, and you do some things to kind of figure out whether or not there's a reason to be on heightened alert. So the thing about kids is that their smoke detectors internally are not fully developed on both sides of their brain. So they hear that, they're probably going to be in a state of, let's get out of the house right now and call 911. So it requires help in kind of how do we navigate this. Now, the other thing is to realize that if there's been a traumatic event, like if your house burned down when you were a child, if your house caught on fire and the fire trucks had to come and put the fire out, and it ruined a lot of things in your home and all of those kind of things, then if the fire alarm goes off in your house, you're out. And that's not extreme. That's in response to what you have already experienced. So we have to remember that some kids have had experiences that when there is smoke, there is definitely fire. So helping them navigate that, and even doing it in a teaching environment, is really important. So I just put these two kind of processes down we use with kids and with teens as well. One is to regulate, to when there's heightened emotion, to be able to calm down, to breathe and do, we would do self-talk like, okay, we're okay. We're probably just going to need to go figure out what's going on. And then investigate, like, what is going on? What is the reality around me and around what's happening? And then develop a safety plan. And kids can do this. They can, but sometimes they need help. So they need co-regulation. There's a lot of really good research on this particular thing. And so I don't really have a lot of time to be able to uncover all of it. But co-regulation is just helping kids, just like an infant. If I'm calm while I'm rocking you, then you're soothing. if I'm not, you might stay in a heightened sense of alert as well. So co-regulation is really important. If we can be calm, they can be calm. That helps kids a lot. But this other process, validate, typically when I do this with people, it's validate and reassure. So you validate the emotion somebody seems to be having, and then reassure them that things are okay. Well, the challenge for kids is that they're not using both sides of their brain quite yet, and so, or fully developed. And so they need some help with identifying what they're feeling, being able to communicate what they're feeling, and the thoughts that are going with that before reassurance is really effective. So it's a really important thing, because if we say to kids, there's nothing to worry about, and I do it, I'm just gonna admit I do it. So, but when we tell them that there's nothing to worry about and they're worrying, then we tell them that what they're feeling is not valid, and it's confusing, and it makes them wonder if they are not thinking right. If we say there's nothing to be afraid of, and they're afraid, and we have to remember that God knit that into us for safety purposes, for us to have those feelings of, I might not be safe. When there's trauma and kids have that kind of locked in their brain, it makes it quite a bit harder. So, so here are just a couple of kind of practical things in the teaching environment, the integration of safety into what you're doing. One is to create safe places. And I love children's ministries, because when you go in there, it just is fun. You know, most classrooms are fun. We create safe space and fun space. But what I mean by creating safe spaces is having kids in community, and I know community is hard right now, but in community where they know that things are safe. Now, right now, we are using language like things are never going to be the same. The church is not going to be the church we know or are used to. Or we use language like that, unfortunately, instead of God's opening up new opportunities for us. So our words really, really matter, and how we talk about what's happening around us is super important when we're around kids. We know to filter what we say around them, but particularly now when everything visually that they're seeing, injustices and people being harmed, and all of the things that are around us, they're seeing that and feeling very unsafe and extremely hopeless, like it'll never get better. So we do have to watch what we say, and that's how we create safe space. And then creative connection. So I put up this left and right side of the brain, because I think this is super important when you're teaching, you who are teaching children, and especially when it comes to faith, right? There are so many people scripturally that show us what God can do in the midst of really difficult things, that when we connect kids to the story, we connect kids to God, which you already know. And so, but when we connect kids to stories that are relative to what they are feeling inside, and what they're experiencing, when we can actually take it to a practical place, then we can really connect them to where God can be for them right now in the midst of what's going on. So creative connection, we also know from the current research that is really opening up that place where kids feel unsafe, opening that part of their brain up to being safe. So talking about things instead of myself in other creative ways, certainly in therapeutic environments we're using it, but that could be true for the classroom as well. So I think that's a really good opportunity for us as we teach children about who God is to be able to allow them to be really creative in their connection. And that takes them to a place where they can put language, not only to God's story, but to their own story. Movement is really important. I think sometimes when people are really upset or feeling anxious, we want them to sit and to calm down and to breathe. Super important, works really well for us as adults, but so does movement. And because kids will have physical energy associated with worry or feeling unsafe, movement is the best thing. Let's go for a walk. Let's walk down the hall. Let's move, because that really does help them process. It also connects them to other places in their brain. Movement is kind of something that can not distract, but to integrate other parts of their brain that help them move out of a place of fear. So that's a super important thing too, is to allow for that. I can't remember exactly which author I read this in, but the integration of truth is really a critical part of what you all do as you're teaching kids about who God is and what Scripture says and that kind of thing. But I think this is really important to understand that survival trumps integration every time. And what I mean by that is that it's very hard if you feel afraid and worried and concerned. It's really hard to get to that place where who God is and what God does and what God can do can integrate into a healing place. And so it's really important to create safety, and you all probably know that, before we can really get to the truth. So helping kids have language around faith issues, what God can do and how God can do it, is really helpful if they really are feeling safe. And a lot of kids do when they're outside of an environment that's traumatic. So I think that's really important. Let's see if I can stop my sharing again. I want to be able to just catch a couple questions right here. So let me see if I can do this. There it is. Can y'all see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, my computer just does some weird thing in the interim. Okay, I'll take, let's see, 1 or 2 questions right now, if you have them.
Amy's back on. I think she has a question.
Okay.
Amy.
Can you hear me now? Yay, thank you. Hey, Dawn, thank you so much. I was just going to ask if you care to speculate or what you're anticipating some of the pieces that you will be treating people of all ages after the pandemic or you know, in 2 years. You know, are you looking at anxiety issues or social issues, or what do you anticipate seeing as far as mental health issues?
I think anxiety, definitely. I mean, right now, our increase primarily in the counseling environment is depression and anxiety. It was already on the rise, but the pandemic and the social issues currently are driving that. And obviously for teenagers, which is the area I work in primarily, that sense of hopelessness is really concerning. And so I'm thinking that the longer the pandemic's gone on, I think that that's going to be a challenge even for kids who are 9, 10, 11 right now. When they get into adolescence and they really have that ability to process through the impact, I think it's going to be really hard for them.
Do you offer any, you know, I mean, I know that it's not just parents and it's not just uh, church leaders that they are surrounded by, but could you, you know, I know you've talked a little bit on language and how we present things, as far as things are not going to be the same versus we have opportunity for new experiences, you know, but, you know, are there any other tactical pieces that we could use to help, if that makes sense? Like
It does. I think it's really just a shift in language around what we are hoping to experience versus the damage that's been done. So just really looking forward to where we are finding new ways to do things, um, and kids can be a part of that in a big way. So I think it's just really switching to the positive and the hope, not only the hope that we have through God's power, but just the hope that we want for our kids to have. I think if we just switch to hope language, you know, it's really helpful. And when we want kids, I use this example sometimes with parents too, but when you tell a kid, you're lazy and you never pick up your room, that does not motivate them to pick up their room. When we say things like, it would really help me if you would pick up your room, then we have a greater chance of having them do that. But if we say things like, I know that you will do something, like, I know it because I hope it, then they're even more motivated. So I just think it's switching the language to speak what we hope for instead of what we don't have. That's kind of how I set it up.
Dawn, Leanne had
Yeah.
another question.
Okay.
Leanne, do you want to ask it, or do you want me to try to go back up?
I'm happy to ask it. I just was thinking about the correlation between the way the parents react and the way the children react. Are we seeing a correlation? Do you know what that is? And so I'm wondering, like, most of us work with children, but do we need to shift some work with parents and their anxiety?
Definitely. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Our parents are, you know, we all are. We're all concerned about what the future looks like. But from a faith perspective, you know, God has always been in control, still is in control. And so trying to focus on the hope we have in that for our adults so that they can, you know, co-regulate the kids that are struggling. Absolutely. It is holistic. It is an environment where we need to care for everybody. That's definite.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and move. Oh, I did it again. Hang on. See if I can get this, share my screen.
There's two other comments in the chat. If you want to address those later, you can.
Yeah, I will. Let me do this real quick so I can.
Because we're running out of time.
Yeah, we're going to run out of time. I know, we're going to run out of time. Okay, so just a little bit about when to refer and how to refer. So I'll tell you really quickly, when I was my first part of my ministry was in youth ministry. It still is, as I serve kids out in the community at Task. But I had a parent bring their teenager to me, and she was having all kinds of behavior issues. This was, 20 some years ago. And I started talking to her, and I started asking her some questions, and she looked at me one time and she said to me, "You have no business asking me that question." And I thought, "Ooh, she's probably right." I have no idea what I'm doing. And so it just reminded me that there are situations that families are in, that kids are in, that that we're not equipped to manage because that's just not our training, or it's not our area, or whatever it is. So it's really important for all of us, for pastors, for for people who work directly with kids, for their parents, to have a good referral system. every single youth minister, pastor, and children's minister should know one or two therapists in their community that they could refer people to. And so, but finding those people is kind of always a challenge. And so what I would suggest is if a family is in crisis and you know that they are unable to regulate or co-regulate because the parents can't, or because the kid, they've tried a lot of things and they can't, and you feel like having different intervention would help them, then I would say look for a licensed professional person, counselor, whatever. So just so that you know, there are licensed professional counselors and licensed marriage and family therapists. That's a licensed person. Psychologists, who are people who can do testing. They can do assessments. Some LPCs and LMFTs can as well, but psychologists are trained to do those specifically, but they also do counseling. So that's the difference between a licensed person and a psychologist. A psychiatrist is an MD, and they provide medication, pretty much medication only. They do assessments, but they don't do therapy. So just so you know kind of the language around that. So what I suggest is that people look for counseling centers where they are, where they live, and then they either email or call some therapists. Children's therapists are typically certified or licensed play therapists because they can use metaphors really well, which we know works very, very well. And when asking questions, when you're trying to select the referral that you're going to use, here are a couple of questions. What experience do you have with children? That would be the first thing. How long have you been in practice? You might want to ask them how to describe how they work with kids. You know, what kind of things do they do for families? And do they involve families in the therapy process? Because if you refer a family, you're going to need to be able to tell the parents, you know, they'll probably want you to be a part of this as well. What kind of license do they have? How do they establish goals and measure progress? That's a very important part of mental health effectiveness. We have to know how we know it's working. And then if they can explain their therapy approach. Again, it's just really what do they do in counseling specifically. So those are a couple of questions that I would encourage you to do some research on who might be some counselors in the area that work with whoever you happen to work with, children or teens, and ask them those questions, and then let them know that you would like to be able to refer families to them, and how would you do that? So that you can have one or two people that you can refer families to if they need it. Okay, so this is not an exhaustive list, but I can give you some referrals. But like I said, I think the most important thing is that you have individual contact with people in your community that are close by, and even ask them to give you their cards so you can hand them out, so you have that resource. But Methodist Family Health is amazing, and they have all kinds of places where they can refer you to. So this is always my go-to and my recommendation, especially here in Arkansas. Oh, 5 minutes. I thought that was the 1 minute. Okay, we're 5 minutes. And then the Mental Health Council of Arkansas also has a pretty exhaustive list of what's around and in your community right here in Arkansas. Now, for those of you who aren't in Arkansas or who want to do some other looking, these are kind of the websites that you can go to where people who want others to know like what they do and how they do it. They might even answer the questions that I just gave you. They might even answer those questions in their profiles on these particular websites. But Theravive is one that gives a pretty exhaustive list too, and but all of those would give you some idea of how people are credentialed and what they do. All right, that pretty much finishes up what I have. But I just want to give a quick second or look at the chat. Michelle, if you have one or two things that you think it would be really good for me to answer in the moment, I will be happy to do that.
Yeah, let me look back through here. There were some comments about after the events at the White House, some children being terrified, about, going into civil war, what's going to happen, and, their actual valid points. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I think, there are adult conversations. So we as adults should be having conversations at that level with adults, our concerns and that kind of thing. I think we just need to reassure, validate that kids are worried and that they're concerned, and then reassure them that, that things will get managed. We don't know how, but they will get managed. And from a faith perspective, to remind people that there have been times where there's been a lot of political challenge and God has been in control and taking care of his people. So again, just instilling the fact that there's hope in the midst of things, and that you are with them, the children, to help them feel safe and protected, and that God is with all of us to do the same.
There was also another comment about a child being very fearful of getting the vaccine. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, I think, again, the same thing, right? Validate that they're afraid, and then help them identify where does the fear come from, and to come up with a safety plan, or also history for them. You might be able to talk about having had other vaccines before that were okay. It's a little bit of a challenge because some people aren't really sure that they can speak hope into that. So we really have to kind of keep ourselves in check. If I don't feel good about it, then I'm going to have a really hard time telling my kid it's okay. So I think we have to maybe do some investigation and come up with a plan, a safety plan that does help kids feel in control if we allow them to do that, to identify what they're feeling, communicate what that is like for them, and then be able to come up with a safety plan or a plan of some sort.
Okay, we've got 1 minute left.
Okay, all right. So I will say this. I think on my slide I put my Teen Action and Support Center email, but Melinda does have my email at the church. So I'm so happy for any of you to email me and let me know if there's ways I can help you, support you, or help you work through a particular situation or answer a question. I'm happy to do that. So I love.
We really appreciate you. This was excellent, excellent, excellent. We're getting lots of yes, Leanne's down there clapping. We really, really appreciate you. Yeah.
No problem. Love to do it in person. That'd be fun. Take care. Be well.
Thank you.